And remember, the true cost of the occupation includes interest, care for veterans, the increased price of oil, and other major elements placing the total in trillions of dollars, according to the calculations of Joseph Stiglitz and William Billness. And yet, what can we do? We're pretty helpless, right? We poor hundreds of millions of Americans who are still sane. We don't have any power, do we? They beat us at every turn, right? Our best hope is to turn the Democratic Party into a close approximation of the Republican Party in hopes of winning like they do, right? And then after the elections, when we aren't needed anymore, somehow turn the Democratic Party back into something else again, something we actually like, something people might actually vote for. Are we as helpless as all that? Aren't we the people who created the single biggest day of global protest prior to the invasion? Didn't we block the legalization of the invasion at the United Nations, making it a crime? Didn't we force the Cheney-Bush gang to come up with a pile of lies to justify the invasion? Didn't we expose those lies? Didn't that help forestall an invasion of Iran? So far? Didn't support for the war and the president plummet just behind awareness of the lies that we exposed? Aren't we in touch with each other and our allies around the world, informing people that Americans do not support the slaughter? If you think that we have no power, consider this. Last week, Senator Hillary Clinton gave the peace movement credit for her defeat. She has not conceded, but mathematically, she has been defeated. And she was speaking specifically about caucuses, about why she loses all the caucuses and wins primaries. She disdainfully referred to us as the activist base of the Democratic Party. According to Senator Clinton, these activists turn out in great numbers, and they are very driven by their view of my positions, and it's primarily national security and foreign policy that drives them. I don't agree with them, and they know I don't agree with them. This is a Democrat who wants to be president, who thinks the problem is active Democrats. In 2006, we elected a new Congress to end the occupation of Iraq. The corporate media understood and admitted this. And this was the peace movement's work. This was not the work of electoral campaigns. And we gained enormous strength through that effort. But the so-called leadership of the new Congress immediately announced that it would never use its power, which is the power of the purse, to end the occupation. And huge segments of the peace movement shrieked in terror, crawled quietly into abandoned voting booths, and stood crowded in there shaking and shivering for the past year and a half. Some made their position opposition to escalating the war, after having just won a landslide demanding the de-escalation of the war. If 2008 ends, and Congress has done nothing to end the occupation of Iraq, the power we gained by electing them to do so in 2006 will be gone. If we cannot hold elected officials to their commitments, why should they even make them in the future? Now, we don't know who the next president will be or who will be in the next Congress, but we do know that whatever the answers are to those questions, the occupation of Iraq will not end unless we push for it. And we know that it takes time to build momentum and awareness to push for change. If we keep shutting down our movement for a year or more every 2 years, we will never win. If we keep pushing forward as citizens, rather than as the pawns of a party, we will win. We might even win right away. We might not win for a long time, but we will certainly win sooner than if we pause in our work. So we must continue to push Congress to listen to us even when there is an election within 2 years. Because guess what? There is always an election within 2 years. We must also continue the crucial work of counter-recruitment, at which activists in many school districts have been very successful. And we should bird dog Obama until he gets it right, not in order to defeat him, but in order to push him to positions that make possible a landslide. I don't know how many of you have noticed how they count votes in elections over the past 7 years, but I am convinced that Obama must have a landslide to win. A narrow victory doesn't do it. One way to get a landslide would be for Obama to lead a filibuster against the occupation funding. or to join one. And the most likely senator to have the guts to do such a thing is Barbara Boxer, who should be forced to do it.
Yeah, we should
be left no peace until she does it.
Right.
And on the ticket as vice president.
Sounds good to me. Obama or Boxer or any group of decent senators could still fund a withdrawal if they thought that sort of kissing up to the media was required, that sort of superfluous gesture when it's pocket change to the Pentagon to pay for a withdrawal. But when Obama debated McCain, he would be able to take an opposing position and not see it immediately dismissed. If the Democrats fund another 1.5 years of slaughter, the only people to benefit will be war profiteers and third-party candidates. And maybe Republicans as the Democrats make themselves look weak. Millions of families are likely to lose their homes in the United States in the next 9 months, thanks in large part to Bush's regulators' management of the banking industry, and thanks to the growing Bush-Cheney recession, which appears to be the result in part of the outrageous expense of occupying Iraq and Afghanistan, and the broader, perverse effect on the economy of having made weapons our top export and weapons making our biggest public investment. The weapons industry is not competitive. Cost-plus contracts mean that the longer it takes and the more it costs, the bigger the profits. And once the stockpiles exist, the best way to justify more work is to use the weapons. Meanwhile, all other industry is allowed to wither away. Technological spin-offs of our huge public investment in the military generally have to be manufactured elsewhere. And even public investments in things like mass transit have to create jobs in other countries, because the only thing we know how to make is weapons. Shifting our public investment from weapons to green energy, to infrastructure, to transportation would benefit our economy as much as our environment. The greatest purveyor of violence in the world is, by no coincidence, also the wealthiest nation in the world that does not provide its people with health coverage. About 1 in 6 Americans has no health coverage at all, and another 2 or 3 out of those 6 lack adequate coverage, even though they pay more than enough to receive it and to provide it to those who lack it. Millions of Americans lack preventive health care and are deeply in debt for the expenses of emergency treatment, are forced to work longer hours to provide health coverage to themselves and their families, and suffer unnecessary illnesses and deaths. One result of this is that Americans have less time and freedom and energy to invest in civic life, including in peace demonstrations and lobbying elected officials. If we had universal health care, we would be in a better position to demand universal health care, which is the way it seems to go. Now, our government is funded and heavily lobbied by the oil barons and the weapons makers and the disaster capitalists, the corporations who destroy and pretend to rebuild. We dump at least half of every tax dollar into these immoral expenses. There's a nice Code Pink website where you can stop doing that, called Don't Buy Bush's War. In fact, we spend as much on our military as do the rest of the nations of the world combined, and we call these expenses defense, although they are used entirely for offensive wars, bombing missions, and the maintenance of 1,000 military bases in other people's countries. To contrast this gluttonous expense with our healthcare disaster can be misleading if taken to imply that the money should be moved from killing to saving. The fact is that as a society, if not as a government, we already spend enough on health to provide universal coverage and have money left over. But we don't use our government to create efficiencies. Instead, as much as 1/3 of every dollar goes into waste and bureaucracy and advertising for the private insurance industry. Eliminating those middlemen and simply providing everyone with health care to be paid for by the government would eliminate 90% of the paperwork. The health coverage would be public, as it should be. The health care would still be private. You choose any private doctor you want, you just leave with no paperwork, including no bill. And if this sounds too good to be true, remember that every other wealthy nation on the earth already does it and gets more health care for less money than we do. So ask your representative in Congress to sign on to H.R. 676 and to visit pdamerica.org. But understand that no good bill will get past a veto, that nothing can be done in Washington except impeachment. You can imagine something else to be more plausible, more reasonable, more realistic, more viable, but explain to me what the hell it is and how it gets past a veto. There is nothing more realistic than impeachment. So we should join with the Congressional Progressive Caucus in demanding of our Congress members that if they bring any bill up to fund this occupation, that it not include domestic spending and economic stimulus, that it not give anybody an excuse to vote for it. And today it looks like we're in good shape on that in the House, but not the Senate. But above all, we should demand no votes. And we should all phone Pelosi and Murtha. We should quote Murtha's words back at him that I read you earlier and urge them not to bring any money for Iraq up for a vote at all, unless it's a withdrawal. And we should call the Obama campaign with the same message. And we should demand that our Congress members commit not just to voting no, but to lobbying Pelosi and Reid not to bring it up. In July of 2007, Congressman Kevin McCarthy opposed a bill that would have suggested a timeline for ending the occupation. I choose the term suggested intentionally. Would not have required anything. And he released a statement that read in part, quote, and remember, this is in July of 2007, our new Iraq strategy is showing a sign of improvement as 50% of Baghdad is secure, up from 19% in April. In September, General Petraeus will deliver to Congress his progress report on the new Iraq strategy. For the next 2 months, we should keep our promise by giving General Petraeus and our troops the time and resources they need to fully execute the new strategy. We owe this to them and their mission. Do we owe General Petraeus and our grandchildren's hard-earned pay these 9 months later with no progress report? That is a question to take to Representative McCarthy. With the surge having failed, must we keep paying for the killing and dying? Or if he pretends that the surge has succeeded, must we keep paying for the killing and dying? Is what is required of us the same either way? Is there any way out other than voting you out of office, Congressman? We should go to Congresswoman Lois Capps and we should thank her for signing on to John Conyers' bill for an impeachment investigation during the last Congress and ask her why the addition of 2 more years' worth of crimes to the record has led her to back off. We should take our so-called economic stimulus tax refund checks and sign them over to pro-peace and pro-impeachment candidates with a note explaining why, and photocopy the checks and send those photocopies to other candidates and leaders in Congress with a note explaining why they aren't getting any. We should join on May 1st in solidarity with the longshoremen's and warehouse workers unions which plan to shut down the ports in opposition to the occupation of Iraq, with the immigrants' rights groups which plan to rally around with the Teamsters when they stop their trucks, with the postal workers when they stop the mail, with the peace movement and the impeachment movement when they go on strike and boycott and engage in civil disobedience. We should join with the rest of the country on May 1st. And if you go to democrats.com/Mayday, democrats.com/Mayday, post there that you agree with the rest of us around the country that at high noon local time on May 1st, you will go to your Congress member's office and bring the Constitution and tell him or her that the Constitution demands impeachment. And we should support the work of Code Pink, and we should buy Elizabeth de la Vega's book, and we should get together like this and talk and discuss, as I hope we're going to do. Thank you very much for having me come.